And Libya is on the brink tonight as mass demonstrations continue to engulf that entire country. Now, protesters are calling on strongman Muammar Gaddafi to step down. Now, in response, Gaddafi is cracking down, unleashing tanks and warplanes on the protesters, all in an effort to crush their rebellion. Now, the defiant leader appeared on state television earlier today and refused to cede power. Now, he even cast the blame for his troubles on foreigners, calling his opponents cats, rats, and cowards. But shockingly, the events in Libya are not the most dramatic taking place in that region. Also tonight, Iran is on the aggressive. Iranian warships are in the Suez Canal headed for Syria, where they will take part in a training mission, supposedly. Now, the last time this happened was during the Iranian Revolution. Israel is decrying this provocation. A senior Israeli official is even charging that it signals Iran's desire to dominate the entire Middle East. Now, the unrest in the region is already affecting America as gas prices have now spiked to $3.17 a gallon. That price is almost 50 cents higher than it was a year ago, and it is likely to keep rising. Joining me now with reaction, Wall Street Journal senior economic writer Stephen Moore and former White House press secretary, Fox News contributor, and by the way, part of the establishment. This is what Dana gave me, establishment. Why did you give me this T-shirt?
Well, last October, you labeled me establishment, and I had lots of people contact me and say that they were establishment too. So I went ahead and made some T-shirts and brought you one.
I did not. It was a throwaway line. I didn't mean anything by it.
I mean, the power of Sean Hannity.
Well, that's because Stuart Varney and I were ganging up on you that night.
Always.
All right. Well, first of all, you know, according to eyewitnesses, we got Gaddafi using tanks, helicopters, warplanes, mercenaries, all in a fight to combat this revolt that is going on. Now, the Fox report reported tonight that half the country now has been taken over by the rebellion.
Well, it's a very precarious situation. In some ways, people, looking at this would say, oh, this has started in Tunisia and it's gone on to Egypt and other places. While that is true, each country in the Middle East is very different. They are ruled by different leaders. This leader in particular is very brutal, very beleaguered, and also taking a stand. Unlike Hosni Mubarak, who tried to reach out and say, look, you are my brothers, and no one really was buying that. Gaddafi's done the other thing, and he's turned their own military on their people, and we have yet to say anything really strong out of the United States.
Well, I'm going to get to that in a second here, but I mean, look who Gaddafi is. I mean, look, he supported, for example, as Wolfowitz points out in the Journal today, supporters like Charles Taylor of Liberia. I mean, he supported death, misery, mayhem, terror for years and years and years.
Decades.
for decades. And now they're shooting, according to Reuters, they're literally shooting citizens on the streets of Libya right now. And warplanes even defected because they didn't want to fire on their own citizens and drop bombs on the people of Libya.
You know, Sean, what's really despicable about this is that for years and decades, the left has sort of apologized for Gaddafi. And when you have a leader that's firing on their own citizens, it reminds me of Hungary in 1958. I mean, That's the kind of imagery that it evokes. And I agree with you, Dana. Where is our national indignation against these acts? I mean, I think we should be standing up for these peace protests.
Well, let me get into that. There's been no direct condemnation. Bill Kristol pointed this out of the Gaddafi regime. No expression of support for the demonstrators. It reminds us of what happened in June of '09 when the Iranian demonstrators took to the streets. Obama was pretty much silent. The British Prime Minister, the British Foreign Minister have had far stronger words of condemnation than our own country. What is it with this president that he doesn't understand what's going on here?
Well, it's a lot of pressure for somebody who won the Nobel Peace Prize just 3 months after being in office.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But again, in their defense, I think there's very delicate diplomacy going on here. Secretary Clinton did come out today and try to fix it, though. I watched her read the statement.
It was timid, like everything.
Diplomacy. This is beyond diplomacy, isn't it? I mean,
well,
when you've got.
I don't know. I think that in some ways they are thinking about if they say this, what happens 2 or 3 steps down the road, and they're not necessarily focused on just this news cycle. Though I will say it does leave you wondering. They can be quicker to respond to other things.
But what's different about this than Egypt, where you have Mubarak? Mubarak at least was in some ways pro-U.S. Gaddafi has been anti the United States for decades. We have no stake in keeping him in power, Sean.
Listen, Obama pressured Hosni Mubarak to leave. Right. Mubarak's like a Sunday school
exactly.
To
That's my
Gaddafi.
point.
All right, and the point is, we have virtual silence. Let me give you one other example. we have these 4 American Christian ministers going out giving Bibles away. They're killed by these Somali pirates. And I'm thinking to myself today, what if Ronald Reagan were president? No, think about this. Ronald Reagan would have blown these pirates out of the water, simply not stood by and taken this. And it seems that this president projects nonstop weakness, that he doesn't have the stomach to take on America's enemies. He
does seem timid. And I don't necessarily think that he is. I think that he's quiet and he thinks things through, and then he's slow, and then they try to play catch up, and then they try to convince us how they were right all along. But if you look at a national security...
Why don't we stop the Iranian warships from going through the Suez, considering that as an act of provocation against Israel?
Well, if I were, just in talking to some people today, I do think Israel ought to try not to overreact. Well, the Egyptians haven't done it, because you don't know what's going to happen in the long run. And we tried.
Yeah.
Establishment can also mean reasonable and thoughtful.
But you know what Reagan believed in?
The Egyptian army controls the Suez Canal, and under international law, I'm not saying it's right, under international law, they have the right to do it.
But you know what? Reagan believed in, peace through strength. And what we seem to be having from this administration is peace through weakness. And that only causes...
peace.
Exactly.
The world's blowing up before
That's right.
our
And
eyes.
by the way, this is 2011. Why are there still pirates? Why is it that... I agree with you. Why aren't we doing something to rid the seas of pirates? This isn't 1811. This is 2011.
Yeah, maybe to get condemnation, maybe they should just, join the Republicans in the Wisconsin state legislature, and there might be condemnation then at that point. I mean, I find their silence deafening on a serious matter.
It's unsettling, and in some ways, you feel like they're walking on the national security standpoint, and foreign policy. National security, they've been pretty solid, right? They've kept a lot of things that my former boss, President Bush, kept in place in order to keep us safe.
Yeah, but they feared Bush. The world feared President Bush.
Well,
They knew he would act.
Gaddafi is actually a good example of that. It was in December 29th, 2003, that he said, "Okay, I'll give up my program," and then President Bush tried to bring them along, and it's all now. It's all falling apart.
Guys, good to see you. Thanks for being with us. And you did pretty good without the British accent. Hey, filling in for Stuart.
Great to be with you.
All right, and coming up, the proper role of the federal government. That is a subject that most officials in Washington don't know much about these days. It's also the subject of Governor Mike Huckabee's brand new book. He's here to discuss that, coming up next, and much more.